Hi, everyone. I'm Deborah from #DebTalk. It's an informal mentoring space where I share guidance, ideas, thoughts, advice to help you successfully navigate the workplace. Today, I'm really excited. We're going to be talking about remote work. The title of today's talk is actually Doing Remote Work Like a Boss. But I've been toying with another topic, which is remote working it like a boss. So if you like that, you can put that in the comments. And to help me do that today, I've invited a very special friend. She's going to help us pull out some, as we unpack this topic, really, she's going to help us pull out some helpful tips, practical tips to help us do remote work well. Her name is Madalina Iordache, and I want to just read a little bit about her. She is the CEO and Chief Strategist of Bright Pink Agency, which is an award-winning marketing and web design agency in Coral Springs, Florida. With a degree in journalism, a former career in digital art, and 13 plus years of experience in marketing, Madalina loves communication in all of its forms. Most of all, she is passionate about helping small businesses grow themselves through planned, strategic, and intentional marketing. And just so I throw my little personal thing in there, I met Madalina a couple of years ago through our participation in Toastmasters. We're actually both officers or leaders in a local club. And what struck me about Madalina and why I just so respect her is the fact that she is humble, the fact that she is someone who is interested in continuously learning. I mean, you would think, yeah, she's a CEO, she's a small business owner. What else does she need to learn? But since I've known her, she's been very intentional about wanting to grow and learn. And I think that that's such a wonderful quality. And I guess the last thing that sticks out to me a lot about her is the fact that this lady is willing to make some serious boss moves, even if she doesn't have all the details. If she believes that if she believes that it's beneficial. I mean, I'm not saying that she will totally jump off the side of the hill without a parachute, as she said in some speeches, but she's definitely willing to make those moves. And so I totally respect her. So please, I want you to, even though this is not a live recording, just put some hearts. I just want to welcome you, Madalina.
Thank you so much for having me for this conversation, Deborah. It's an honor and a pleasure. I appreciate the introduction and I look forward to this interview.
Absolutely. All right, cool. Well, right before we dive into this topic, I wanted to talk a little bit about why are we even talking about remote work? You know, why is this something that's relevant and why is it important? Well, right now it's April, right? And March of last year, the entire world really learned about the fact that there was a massive pandemic. It disrupted everything, including work. I mean, disruption is a mild word, but let's focus a little bit on the fact that it caused massive changes at work. There were many companies who ended up having to close their doors and basically left 10 to 18 million workers out of work. And that's a number that may change depending on how you're counting it, according to the Washington Post. But then there were other companies who were able to stay in business, but they had to make some drastic shifts where they now had to basically have everyone become remote. So like within a matter of weeks, this had to be something that happened. And that's where the real fun began. Because now you have people working remote who had never worked remote before. You had folks where everybody was basically having to shelter in place. So you have one person in the living room working from off of the living room table, that's become the office. Another person perhaps working from the kitchen table. And then because the kids were doing virtual learning, now parents had to be both, they're trying to focus on their own job, but they're also being principal and teacher to their kids. So this was a lot. I had friends who talked about the fact that they felt really burnt out. I had folks who were trying to, I guess, balance, work-life balance was hard because it was like there was no demarcation. And that was really some of the things that I learned. However, the thing is, while there are employers that are going back into the workplace and pulling employees back into the workplace, remote work is by no means something that's in the past. There are many companies basically who have said that this is basically what they're going to be doing, either fully remote or partially remote. A couple of companies like Salesforce, Dropbox, Facebook, and Salesforce basically said that, this is a quote from the chief people officer, president, what's his name? It's Brent Hyder, president and chief people officer for Salesforce. He says, an immersive workplace is no longer limited to a desk in our towers. The 9-to-5 workday is dead, and the employee experience is about more than ping pong tables and snacks. And in fact, what they've decided to do is to have 3 different versions of stuff where folks are fully remote. Some would stay in the office, some would come in. So with that backdrop, the goal of today is to really glean some tips from Madalina about how to do remote work well. And she's very much qualified to speak on the topic because of the years of experience that she's had both being and leading a remote team. Now, with all of that said, Madalina, let's jump into it. So I think Madalina is a little frozen. And one of the other things that's an issue with remote work is connectivity. And every single one of us have gone through that, where you're in a meeting and you're working from home and stuff happens with the Wi-Fi. You have no control over that. So we're definitely seeing the aspects of remote working even now. So with that said, Madalina, I want to ask you, why don't you tell us a story of how you started Bright Pink Agency, which in and of itself is an interesting name. But tell us a story about that.
Yes, the story started really almost 13 years ago. And it started during another challenging time in our history here. If you think back then in 2008, we were going through a recession. So not much different than last year, minus the pandemic, but businesses were suffering. The problem was that I had no idea that was happening. So I thought this is a great time for me to go off on my own and start my own company. I was working at a time for a web design agency. I didn't really like the status quo there. I wasn't agreeing with my boss how things were done. And being young and inexperienced, I thought I could do better. So I'm going to do better. At the same time, I noticed that things were going a little south, the recession, of course, and figured before the whole thing ships, I'm going to jump and going to build my own little boat so I can stay afloat and move forward with my own direction. And that's what happened in November 2008. And then about 6 months later, I was still on my own. I wasn't really sure if this is called freelancing or building a business. It was a little bit of both, but I noticed there was a lot more demand that needed skills that I didn't have, such as development. So I used to outsource those parts of my business. But that was the perfect time for me to recruit my younger sister, who had just graduated from computer science. I poached her from the company she was working for at the time, back in our home country of Romania. And she came here just to learn from me, like, what's going on? What is this web design business all about? And then went back home and joined me full time. And of course, I had to make her a partner because she was so much more than just an employee in the business. So she's been my partner ever since. And that's how Bright Pink Agency started.
Why did you decide on the name Bright Pink?
It's a funny story. When I was trying to break away from the company I was working from, which was led by this German guy, very masculine, very towering over me and all of that. So I figured, when I make my own company, when I have my own agency, I'm going to call it Bright Pink because I'm a smart girl. And that's what it said. And then when it came time for me to actually start that, it just stuck with me. That thought just stuck with me, and I couldn't even think of a better name for me to start that with. Yeah.
That's interesting because I like that so much. You weren't trying to become like, you didn't feel like you needed to conform and become masculine like, or just become something that you weren't. You really dialed into who you were, what you wanted, and decided that you would name your company based on that. So I think that takes courage. And I think
Yeah.
so many times women go into the workplace, and maybe not so much now, but definitely in the past, and they felt like they needed to be someone else. They needed to become more masculine, or they needed to be like certain people in order for them to thrive in the workplace. But your authentic self is powerful.
Actually, my former boss at the time told me, bright pink, you're never going to be successful with that name. That's a terrible name.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, I'm going to show you differently.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I think that's a great example for us to know, to be authentically yourself, be the very best version of yourself that you can be. And all of us are on that road, but be authentically yourself. You don't have to become anyone else in order to succeed. So, well, I guess, what was it like? You said earlier that you hired your sister. So she was working from Romania while you were in the States?
Correct.
And
So,
obviously, go ahead, sorry.
yeah, at the time she was in Romania when she started working with me, but then she traveled all over. She lived in Ireland, she lived in Germany, she lived in Paris. Now she's been living in London for a couple of years. So the fact of being remote was very appealing for her because it fit her lifestyle. It was an advantage. It was what attracted her. Part of what attracted her to this job was because she was going to have flexibility that a 9 to 5 in a brick and mortar place wasn't going to give her.
Right. Since then, though, your company has grown, and it's not just your sister who is working all over Europe, really, but you have other folks who are working remotely. Tell us a little bit about that and what it was like when you found yourself managing. I mean, I guess I don't know if we could call it a global team, but certainly a team working in different countries.
Yes, it is a global team if I think about it that way.
Yeah.
When I first started hiring, when we realized that we have outgrown, the demand had outgrown what we could put out, I started hiring people, and it was all remote because I was working out of my home. And at the time, I was expecting my twins, my first children. And I knew that I needed to plan for me to be able to take time off after they were being born. So I hired first a graphic designer overseas in my home country of Romania. And that was our first real employee, because I never considered Joni, my sister, an employee. She's my partner. Yes. So George really was our first employee as a graphic designer. And then every other person that we brought on board to the team after that was also remote. We recruited specifically in the same city, where the city where I went to college and Joni went to college. And we planned it that way because we wanted to be able to still meet with those people and create a connection past the virtual, the remote aspect of work. And then about 5 or 6 years later, I realized, actually, I think it was more than that. It was almost 10 years at the time. Yes, it was 10 years. I realized that, okay, 10 years of working from home is enough. My children are old enough. It is time to move this whole business into a brick and mortar sort of place so I can grow my team here as well. I had my personal assistant worked here with me in my home office, should come in there every day. And I realized if I wanted to expand here and be done with meeting clients at Panera and, other cafes, Starbucks and so on, I had to bring it into a physical space. And that's when I started growing the team here as well. And as much as I loved working from home before that, when all my children were young and having that flexibility, that's as much as I love being in the office now. And the transition was very welcome. It was a good progression in the business journey in a way. So now it happens that we have our team here in the home office, as we call it, here in Coral Springs, Florida. We have a team also in Romania, and Joni still lives in London. Although the one change we have done last year as we've grown the team overseas is that we didn't limit it to just Yash, which is the city where we went to school. We've expanded it to other areas as well because we had to recruit where talent was.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. All right. So one of the things you just said was, wanting to recruit in the city where you and your sister went to college because that connection piece was important. And that's a big deal right now when it comes on to remote teams. So my question is, what were some of the things and what are some of the things that you do now to just connect with the other members of your team and to encourage, because as a leader, you also have that oversight where you can kind of determine the culture. What types of things do you do to foster connection? Because that's such an important thing for any team.
So before COVID, when we could travel and get together in person, I used to go to Romania once a year, most years, and get the team together, rent an office space, and for a week or two, we would get there and work in the same space in this big room with lots of desks and chairs, so we could all be in the same space at the same time. And it was a good exercise for us, but also because after hours we would have dinner together, would go do an escape room or some sort of activities to create a little bit of team building, right? Which is harder to do online. And at the same time, I encouraged the team there to also meet with each other, not be isolated. Yes, you work from home, it can be very isolating. So get together and go out for coffee or go out for dinner, and I encourage them to do that. And now, of course, that's harder to do. So I did not go last year. I did not meet my team last year. There's people that we hired since I haven't even met. And we try to compensate doing online team building, which is harder but not impossible.
Right.
So what we do is we do this once a month, kind of like a happy hour call. It's a Zoom call where we don't talk about work. We just talk with each other and we talk about anything. Sometimes we have a topic, and other times it's whatever comes up. Sometimes it's a theme because we did something for the holidays and everyone had a background that represented what they like to do for the holidays and stuff like that. So we did that. We've had Zoom goodbye parties when someone had to leave the team, and we wanted them to know they were happy for whatever comes next for them. So we've done that as well. And this is how we get to learn about each other a lot more than just in the business interactions that we have every day. And I have plans to do even more of that because it's really been beneficial to the business. But one of the challenges that I've seen lately as our team grew, because we are now 11 or 12 people on my team, is that it's kind of hard to do that with a mixed team. So we started separating, having headquarters a happy hour, home office a happy hour, and then the Romanian happy hour with the people overseas because they all speak the same language. So it's easier for them to open up and connect when they are with their own group, rather than when it's a bigger group. What ends up happening is the more outgoing ones tend to take over the conversation, not because they want to, it's just how it works out, they're more bubbly, more outgoing. Exactly. And it doesn't give everyone a chance to open up. So we're definitely still learning, still experimenting, but that's something we have to keep on doing because it's not enough to have work Zoom calls and call that human interaction. You have to do this without the business element involved.
Right. Like that a lot. A lot of companies really started leveraging Zoom as a way of maintaining that connection. So it's really great that you were also doing that, and that when it was more of a hybrid situation, that you did take steps to try and get everyone into the same space. And I would imagine that going forward, many companies will have to do that because at this point you have some folks who are actually in office and some people who are working remotely. But the idea is that you got to get together with the people that you're working with and speak with them, get to know them, and that the relationship can't be something that's simply transactional and basically all business. So I think that's a really great strategy that you employed with your employees. Let's see what my other question is, because I went off on connection because of what you mentioned earlier. Well, what were some things you noticed about those who thrived working remotely? What were some things they practiced or did that stood out? Now, obviously, everybody in your company does well at this. So I guess we could just shift it to what are some healthy habits? And I think you've had to do the same. What are some healthy habits that folks have that really help them do well in a remote setting?
I think one of the most important aspects of it is to have a life outside of your computer too.
Come on, somebody. Okay.
Because we actually, about a year ago, we lost a really good employee because I believe it reached to a point where the remote work was not fulfilling his life needs anymore. And he really craved that human connection that you can only get in person. So that was the reason. And it was unfortunately the transition was difficult because COVID hit at the same time, so it hasn't changed that much. But that really opened my eyes to realize that it's not for everyone. Remote work is really, it's not for everyone. In fact, we saw that last year, even with some of the team members that are here working in person, that it was a struggle remotely. And for me personally too, but my children are a little bit older, but imagine employees with younger children, it's just difficult. It was a complicated situation all around, because it's not that you work remotely by choice, because that's what you prefer to do, like my team members from Romania. It's more that you have to, and then you have to take care of the children at the same time. So it's really tricky. So as far as what one can do to navigate this a little easier, to make remote working successful, for those who do it by choice, they have to make a concerned effort to go and meet with people outside of their remote work. And it's difficult for my team members in Romania because they work later hours, because they need to overlap a little bit. It's 7-hour difference. So their time needs to overlap with those of our team members here as well. So they have the morning to themselves to work till later in the evening, and then they just have a little bit. So they might not always sync with their family or significant other schedules. So they really have to make more of an effort to, okay, this is time that I spent off the computer, offline, because I don't know about others, but if I'm on the computer, I'm tempted to do work stuff, check my email, check my Slack, that kind of stuff. So shut everything down, take some time to yourself, take a walk, meet with someone in real life in a cafe, or have a walk now that it's difficult with COVID and everything, but take a walk with someone, just have some level of human interaction where you see people in person, not just on a screen. I think that's extremely important, even for the most introvert of us. Extroverts need this even more. It's a necessity for them, but even introverts need some level of human interaction, and knowing how to set boundaries for yourself, so you don't end up working from home till 7 or 8 o'clock, because it's just easy to keep doing what you're already doing. It's easier than stopping and say, okay, close the door. I'm stepping into the other side of the house where there's no work. There may be a different kind of work, but there has to be a delineation between work and home.
Right. The setting boundaries piece is so important. I am one of those people that I would be working around the clock, and some people can look at it as tenacity and you being really committed, but I don't necessarily believe that it's healthy. I really believe this idea of setting boundaries is powerful, because the truth is nobody understands what's going on inside you. Nobody can feel what you're feeling. No one can set those boundaries for you. Each of us has to get to a place where we're like, listen, I'm going to give it 100% while I am on the clock, but I need to know when to call it quits so that I can maintain my sanity, so that I can just maintain my mental health. And I think you follow your advice so well, because I follow you on Facebook and I see where you and your family are out camping, where you're kayaking and you are having a fun time. And I think that that's a really great example of, I understand that I need to unplug from work and that I need that human face-to-face interaction with my family and with close friends, and that I need that time. So that is that's a very great lesson about setting up those boundaries. What are some practical steps that folks can take? So you mentioned putting up boundaries, in terms of being able to do well, but what are some other practical things if someone chooses to work remotely by choice that they can do to really set themselves up for success?
Yeah, so having worked from home for 10 years before we moved into the office here, I always had a separate workspace with a door. One of the reasons was because I had young children, so I couldn't have them all up in my business
Yes.
while I was working. They were either with the nanny or they were in school or whatever they were doing. There was a clear separation. When that door was closed, I was in there working. When I was out of there, I was either taking a break or I was done for the day. The door would close, and that was a physical boundary, a physical barrier, and that was it. But also allowed me to create a space that was conductive to work, to have my calendars and my books and my binders and my files, everything arranged in such a way that it was conductive to work. Because if I were to have my workstation and near me I have a laundry basket, I'm going to feel inclined to throw a load of laundry in the washer while I'm waiting for something to process on my computer. And that is that's not going to allow you to do anything well. You're not going to focus on your work, and then you're probably not going to do the housework very well either. So I think that's one of the most important things. And then, like you said, just completely detoxing from digital and from work completely by going out, be in nature. There's nothing that recharges you quite like being outside in nature. And we're blessed here in South Florida that we have year-round good weather. Well, not so much in the summer. I know it's too hot to be in nature. But for the most part, we have opportunities to be in nature. You just step outside your house and there's a park or there's a body of water or a tree to look at. There's so much beauty here and so much to explore and just recharge. And the benefit to that is that once you go back to doing work, you're going to be more recharged and you're going to focus better and you're going to be able to give it your all.
Right. So taking breaks throughout the day, because there are some folks that they will stay, like myself, if you are on a project, you will stay at the computer from sun up till sundown. So making it a point to schedule your own little breaks to walk around the neighborhood. And you also mentioned having a defined workspace. What would you say to someone though, who maybe they don't have that kind of space? They don't have a separate room where they have a door that they could close. How would you recommend they create? Are they able to create a workspace?
It's more difficult, but I think it's doable. You just have to create a bit of a barrier, a bit of a separation. So if it's a corner in your living room, then put up one of those screens, folding screens, something that creates a bit of a barrier. I mean, it's not a wall, but it's better than before. Or arrange your furniture in a way that still shows you that this is my space. Maybe it's your dining room table and then you have to pack everything up in time for dinner so you can reuse it. But having that and not just being, now you're on the couch, now you're the kitchen counter, now you're in a different part of your house. I don't know, it may work for some people, but for someone like myself, I need to have my spaces clearly defined. This is what happens in this space.
So that one doesn't bleed into the next. So creating a separate space, having a defined start and stop time, setting those boundaries, and ensuring that you are taking breaks to connect with nature, as well as connecting with other people if you can. Right? Okay, good. Really good stuff. Let's see what my other questions are. You mentioned you mentioned this earlier, so we might have hit on the answer for this. Were there others who just couldn't do remote working well? And what behaviors did you notice? So one of the things you'd mentioned earlier was just having someone who was talented and who was a valued member of the team, but remote work was just not for that person. Are there things that person, I mean, like you said earlier, remote work is just not for everyone. But do you think that there are some things that folks do that make it even harder to do remote work, habits that folks have that they perhaps need to kick if they're really going to do remote work well?
I don't know if it's a matter of habits necessarily. And in the case I mentioned earlier, it was someone who worked very well remotely for 5 years
Yes.
before deciding. Sometimes it's an evolution in your life. Perhaps when you're young, you don't have a lot of obligations. It's okay to sleep in the morning and then start work at noon and finish at 8 p.m. or later. And that may be fine for a while. And then later on, when you want to have a different lifestyle, more normal, if there's such a thing, then you might decide, okay, this is hard to do remotely, and having rules imposed by someone else, by the regular workspace where you have to come in at 8 or 9 and you can go at 5 or 6. And that's kind of an external barrier in a sense that defines, okay, this is when you show up and this is when you leave, and then you have your other life, non-work life after that.
Right.
So that can change, right, over time. But in other cases, if it's a temporary situation, sometimes there's not much you can do there, because in working with little children at home, you just have to write it out and see, do your best. That I have no advice for that. When my children were little, I had a nanny for them, so she took care of them. She made sure their needs were met, so they wouldn't not bother me, but I needed my thinking space, and you can't do that with little ones knocking on the door. But as far as the majority of the parents who had to work from home last year, and some still do this year, even though most schools are open, my only advice is just write it out, do the best you can. There is no advice. And then for other people, even those who maybe don't have children or obligations, it's just, you're so used that your home is your space where you're free to be whoever. And there's no one telling you need to do this and you need to do that, and this is when you do it, and I expect you to be able to answer on Slack within 10 minutes or less. So it's a mental shift, really. How do you change for being free to be whoever in your home to being strictly business and having to conform to these rules? So that's where a difficulty comes in. And I think those people just do better. They thrive more in an environment where they can be in an office and have coworkers around, and that creates more of an environment where they can thrive and be successful at their job.
Right. It's definitely not for everybody. My brother, it's just so tough for him to work from home. He definitely prefers being in that brick and mortar, as you call it, with all of the different the equipment and different things that make work easier, as opposed to if home isn't set up with all of that stuff. You talked about focusing earlier, and one of the things that folks have to do or have had to do remotely is group projects. So I want you to talk to that. There are folks that are in the workplace, they have some type of a group project that they're working on, and now they have the additional barrier of there's sometimes where it's everyone's remote, or maybe it's some people are remote and some are in the office. What are some tips that you would give about working on projects when you have folks that are remote as well as folks who are in the office or fully remote?
So we do that a lot, right, in our business, in marketing and web design and social media management. No person is an island. You have to work with a group, whether it's internally, but then also with the clients. And even though we might be here together, the clients are not here with us anyway. So either way, you have to exercise this group work. And I would say the biggest advice that I have is over communicate. Meet often but short, just to make sure that everyone is on the same page. For the bigger projects we have, and some of my employees, they have in smaller groups, standing meetings, maybe 10, 15 minutes, maybe less, even 5 minutes every morning, just to make sure that everyone is on the same page, that everyone knows what the next steps are, what's happening that day, what must go out today, what are the deadlines, and everyone quickly gets aligned, and then they go back to their workspaces. And sometimes they happen over Slack. It's not something that usually happens in the, let's huddle up and see what we're working on today. Oftentimes it happens over Slack, just a quick Slack call. Everyone is in it, everyone gets aligned, and then they hang up and they work on their respective piece, and they continue communicating throughout the day through Slack messages. They have specific channels for every project. So this way everyone knows what everyone else is doing and what everyone else is working, and the communication line stays open permanently.
Got it. Well, two things. Tell us quickly what Slack is for our viewers who don't know what Slack is. And the second part, well, let me let you do that, and then I'll ask you the second part.
So Slack is an instant messaging program. It's an application on your computer and your phone where you can chat with your team. You have your whole team there, the entire company is there. You can chat one-on-one, but you can also chat in channels where you create a different channel for every project, for instance. And then everything that's about that project gets posted in there, rather than in one-on-one conversations, because you might have several people involved. And then you may have different conversations with the same people, but about different projects. And you wouldn't want those to be mixed together, right? A lot of time it's about posting links to deliverable. Hey, here's the visuals for this project. Here's the copy text for this project. And it really helps to keep them in the same place. And that is aside for the project management software that we use and that everyone is using to kind of keep an outline of the project in there. But in Slack, it's where the brief, it's kind of like text messaging, but very focused on the project. And it has a phone application as well. So if you are on the go, if you are someone who drives between locations or goes sees clients, everything still stays there.
Yes. Okay, good. I'm glad. So just in case, maybe something that you can introduce to your team at work, or if you're a small business owner, or something that you could possibly think about using. Now, earlier you said that communicate, or rather over communicate. But what if you're not the leader? You're just a part of a group, a part of a team. How do you work effectively? For example, if the leader may not necessarily want to call those stand-up meetings for 10 minutes or for 15 minutes and do that often, how do you as a regular worker ensure that you work well as a part of this team when folks are remote?
That's a tough one. I would say maybe try to suggest using tools that would get an opportunity for you to communicate with your peers, at least, if not necessarily with your boss or your leader, but having that open line of communication in some aspect. It doesn't have to be Slack. There's many other software or programs or platforms that do virtually the same thing. There's Microsoft Teams, and there's Facebook. I forget what it's called. Their platform for that. So there are many other platforms that are conducive to collaboration. So if your team is not using such a thing, I would strongly suggest that you bring that up to your boss and see, can you find a platform that's free at least, or maybe low cost, that you can use to keep this conversation going. Because just those emails that get forwarded to a big group of people, it is arduous to work like that. So much can get lost in that conversation, and so it can improve productivity a lot, just from the fact when everyone knows what everyone else is working in that project, kind of having like almost like a dashboard of this is what's happening, and just allowing communication to flow freely, not necessarily from the top down, but horizontally as well. It would make a big improvement.
I think it's a great idea, and I like the idea of if there's somebody who is a team member and they're not necessarily in charge, so they don't get to determine. Maybe they would love it if we had daily meetings or even weekly meetings, but maybe they have a particular manager that's just not their particular style. Therefore, I love the idea of that person taking the initiative, because there are times that the boss may not be interested in doing things that way, but if someone were to recommend something that would make things better and create that cross, not just top down, but that lateral this type of communication, that they wouldn't be opposed to it. And I think you also establish yourself as a leader in the organization, someone who's not just seeing a problem, but you are solution focused. You're willing to recommend something that could possibly resolve that. So I love that.
Case in point, Slack was introduced to me by one of the employees. It was not my idea. We used to communicate over Skype at the time, where you can have conversations, but they're one-on-one on few. You didn't have that structure where you can have a channel for every project. So she came to me about 3 or 4 years ago and said, "Kid, I suggest we give this a try. I think it would be a great improvement." And I said, "Sure, let's try it. Let's see what it does." And we've adopted it and we've been using it ever since.
Yeah, for sure. There's a free version to Slack, yes?
There's a free version, yes. We use the paid version because it allows us to have video calls, group video calls. With the free version, you can, and this is not an advertisement for Slack.
It's not. We have nothing to do with Slack.
I don't have stock in Slack either. So, but yeah, start with the free version. That's how we started, and then we loved it so much that we upgraded so we can do the group video calls as well.
Right. So the point is over communicate. If you're working on a group project, the more that the people in that group can talk to each other. One of the things I used to do in one of the roles I played in an organization was internal communications, and one of the most frustrating things for the employees that I spoke with was the fact that the different departments sometimes were not effectively communicating with each other. And so you would have a lot of overlap where one particular department is working on something, but the other department is working on the same thing. Or maybe something is happening in one department that affects somebody else, but because that active communication is not happening, then there's frustration and chaos. And over again, people were like, we need to be talking to each other. The same thing applies to a team. So you can be that change. And just the point is that you should over communicate.
I agree.
Yeah, let me see what
I never heard anyone complaining about too much communication.
Yes.
I've heard people complain about this. I was not aware of that. I did not know that this was being worked on by some. Never heard like, oh yeah, I already heard that before. Right. It's already been said.
Yeah. I think it's a big deal. And I think what's important too, just as another tip, is just get real clarity on the role you're supposed to be playing in the team. Get real clarity about that. It can't be fuzzy because of the fact that we're working remotely. Just get very clear on what your particular role is, what the specific deliverables are for you, what, when, where, so that you are playing your particular role well on the team. All right, let's see. So we talked about communication. We talked about practical tips for setting up space in your home, whether you're using a divider, living room table, maybe using the dog as a way of separating. Okay, that's a joke. But let's see. We talked a bit about connection. So I had a question here on that. But we've talked about folks who may feel isolated, and you've shared with us that you got to find ways and means of connecting, whether it's doing the Zoom happy hour, or if it's safe, being able to meet and connect with people at some point or the other. Let's see. Oh, here's another one. Right. So one of the things that a lot of employers were going through, because just as shifting to remote work was a huge transition for professionals, it was a huge transition for managers and leaders in an organization. How do you monitor these folks and ensure that everybody's doing their job. And that was some of the questions in some folks' mind. There were certain articles where certain managers were concerned. Are employees just sitting down, binge watching stuff on Netflix or doing laundry? So there's and different companies have different philosophies when it comes on to that type of relationship with employees. But how can a remote worker navigate these concerns that their boss may have about whether or not, I mean, outside of obviously delivering the goods, how can they navigate these concerns and the uncertainty that certain managers have? That are y'all actually at home working, or are you doing your own thing?
I think there's two things here to notice. So first is, like I said, delivering the goods. If you are accomplishing what is expected of you, and I'm assuming that's clearly mentioned from the start, maybe in a team meeting or something, was established that this is who does what. So if you do your part and you report on that to whoever you're reporting, that's one thing. And the other thing is being available. So that's another great thing with Slack. When people are active on their computer, it shows this green bubble in front of their name. That means they are actively at their computer. If you step away for 10 minutes, your bubble turns gray, which means you're no longer at your computer.
Learn something.
And that can happen. You may say everyone is entitled to a break, right? I mean, that's human nature. But the point is that if your supervisor or your boss is looking for you on Slack, you should always respond within 10 minutes. I think that is expected, unless you specifically say you're going on lunch break, where you're taking your 1 hour or 20 minutes or whatever is your policy for a break. Outside of that, I think if you respond within 10 minutes, everything is going to be fine. And sometimes you don't respond, not because you're not working, because you're immersed in what you're working, and you may not notice your notifications, but within 10 minutes, you should be able to respond.
Yes, I think that's good. That's good stuff, Madalina, because I mean, here's the thing. Your manager also has a job. Your manager has a responsibility and a job as well. And, you know, I'm glad that you brought up the fact that there are times that you can get really immersed in what you're doing, and you don't have time to be checking notifications or going to check on email or making sure that you're active on Slack. And sometimes it's stressful as an employee to feel like, oh my gosh, you know, I am working. Why do I need to be checking in with you? But the reality is that your manager also has a job, and it was such a shift for them where they're not seeing, and there are some employees out there that they're going to be on task and they're going to be doing their stuff. And just like in life, there are going to be folks out there that will take advantage of stuff. And so it's just important for you to, like Madalina said, to be available. So answering something within 10 minutes, worst case scenario. And just being available, responding.
Be available. Don't feel like you have to send an email every 10 minutes just so they can see you were working. Today, most of us are knowledge workers, right? So we're not really selling our time. We're selling what we do with our time, what we create, what the value we bring during the time we work. So because our value isn't measured in how many widgets we create every hour or how many pieces of.
Are you quoting Peter Drucker? That's so Peter Drucker, I'm telling you.
I don't know, is it?
Yes.
But it's in the value we bring. So it's not that relevant, the fact that you accomplish something in an hour or in 10 minutes. It's because that differs from person to person, right? And from the level of experience. But if you are showing the results of your work, and if you're available, you're gonna be okay. Don't feel like you have to constantly prove yourself just because you are working remotely.
Right. And then the thing too is that there are folks that they have, managers are people, and so they have different styles. For some folks, listen, as long as you're delivering the goods, I really don't care. As long as you meet the deliverable. But you do have other types of managers out there where they need to constantly see that you're on the point. They'll set up meetings at certain times just to make sure that you're on it and different things like that. But at the end of the day, like Madalina said, just just ensure that you're available and that you are also adjusting to whatever leader you have. That's just the reality of the world that we all live in. And I think another way, just to add to what Madalina said earlier, in addition to being available, responding to stuff within a certain time period, consider possibly setting up maybe a weekly one-to-one with your manager, or maybe every 2 weeks or so that you can check in, so that you can apprise them about what's been going on, what you've been doing. That's also one possible way of just engaging with your manager, engaging with your leader, letting them know that you're on it.
That's an excellent suggestion. In fact, I love it when people take initiative on that and show me, okay, this is what I've worked on this week.
Mm-hmm.
Because I may not have the time to check in with people and see what they're actually working on. And they might be doing a lot, and not all of it is visible because it's in a stage that just you can't see. So making a list of what you're working on and making your manager aware of that, it's trust me, him or she will appreciate this very much. It's one less thing they have to wonder or worry about, and it's better to see that progress, that things are happening, whether you keep an eye on it or not, and that you're a self-starter and you're aware of the fact that not everything you do is visible, but here's a list and what's been worked on this week. And it doesn't have to take long, just a quick list. Takes a few minutes of your time and keeps things smooth in the relationship with management. And if they don't want to meet, or if they can't meet, just send a quick email. Hey, here are some highlights of what I've been working on this week. Just, you have to take ownership of that. You have to, as the professional in the workplace, you take ownership of that communication piece, so that they don't wait till they ask, because usually when they ask is bad news.
Oh gosh, yes. Oh, write that down. Okay, I think we talked about burnout, and I think you've given us a lot of great tips on how to avoid that. Let's see. Oh, okay. I knew I had some other questions on my other part. What are your thoughts about appearing on camera? So if we have a mixed team where some are remote or some are in the office, or maybe we have a fully remote team, what are some tips or advice that you would give to that professional about what it communicates when they're on camera, or if they choose to be off camera sometimes? What are your thoughts on that?
I would say being on camera is definitely preferable to being off camera. It always feels like maybe you're hiding something if you're not on camera. You don't want to make anyone suspicious. And I understand sometimes, like, I'm sorry, I have a cold, I look terrible, I'm not going to turn my camera on. So an exception is okay, but as a default, I would encourage you to be on camera to show you got nothing to hide. You're working, you're at your desk, and that's what you're doing. You can have a virtual background on or anything if you don't want to show, your environment there. And as far as what to wear, if your company has a uniform code where you would normally wear a logoed polo or something like that at work, wear that at work, even when you're working from home. You can wear your sweatpants on the bottom, but wear that.
Party at the bottom, but professional person up top.
That's what my children's school did, for instance. While they were doing school virtually, everybody had to wear the uniform polo top. And that was excellent, because again, it's one of those things that puts you into that mindset that while you're wearing this, you're working. And then when your day is done, you're going to go change into your t-shirt or whatever you want to wear. And that is another way to transition from work to being off work.
Right.
So, but definitely don't be too casual. You still represent your company. You still represent your team. You don't want to be too slouchy and too casual. And then your environment matters. Don't be in bed when you're answering your
Madalina, come on now.
I mean, I wish I was kidding, but we had a candidate to a job that was interviewing by laying in bed and leaning back with the pillows behind. And needless to say, that was not a viable candidate, but it happens. So just be somewhere, even if you're at your kitchen counter, don't be too casual. Casual is okay, and people are understanding during this time. But show respect. That's really what it is. Show respect for the person you're talking to in the way you present yourself. It shows respect for yourself and respect for the person you speak to.
Oh, there's so much. You're saying so much good stuff. Your appearance matters. There's so many times that, we'll go into meetings and there's a sensitivity, obviously, that we need to have, but in terms of if you're really trying to communicate that you are that professional who is engaged, fully engaged where work is concerned, if you can be on camera, and I know that cultures of different companies are different, but once in a while, if it's the company's culture to be on camera, do your best to be on camera. And when you show up on camera, be memorable in the very best way. Don't show up like Madalina says, where you are in bed. Don't show up where you have some ripped t-shirt on. No, your appearance matters. Just like it mattered when you were walking around at work, it matters when you're working remotely. People, there are different studies out there, but folks say that people make an assessment of you in about 7 seconds. And it may be quicker. Some other stuff say in the blink of an eye, they're making an assessment about you. And even if you've been there for 5 years and a day, how you carry yourself says something about you. There's going to be a point that you're going to want to get a promotion. There's going to be a point where you're going to want to get another position of some kind. Know that how you carry yourself, that picture is in the minds of the folks that are leading you. So just ensure that you are following those guidelines, because what she said, there's so much in there. It's just practical, sensible advice.
And pay attention to your background. Like,
yes.
You may not have the most beautifully designed background, and that's okay. But if I see a bed that's unmade behind you, or a pile of laundry, or a pair of shoes thrown, those are things that are easy to control. Again, it says something about you. It's okay to work from a little desk in your bedroom, but your bed, if it shows up in the picture behind you, it should be made, or use a virtual background. Otherwise,
not cute at all. I actually do. I have a video, and you'll see that in the comment section, the description section below, where it says 7 tips to do video conferencing meetings well. So I encourage you to take a look at that. But yeah, use the virtual thing. If you don't want to clean the house every single day, use a virtual background. Find a wall where there's no drama going on, and make sure that you record from there.
Yes, that's right. No drama.
Yeah, well, those I think were all of my questions, Madalina. Are there any final thoughts that you have about, again, you're talking to that person who maybe they had to work remotely because they had no option, or maybe they're doing it by choice. Any final thoughts on how they can thrive and really do well if they're working in a situation like this?
Well, if you were in a survival mode, if it's something you're doing it because you don't have a choice, just hang in there, because I feel it. Things are going to change for the positive in the near future. And just hang in there. Use these tips to help you have a smoother rest of the journey in this remote position, and then things hopefully will go back to normal. If it's something you chose to work from home, then use these tips to improve your environment, to improve your own. It really comes down to the work-life balance, after all, a lot of it, because you are home, but you're also at work, so it's harder to make that distinction. So have boundaries for yourself, have your space, use your tools wisely, use these tips, about how to use Slack, and how to maybe give your manager a list of things you've been working on throughout the week, and to your advantage, because at the end of the day, they're just going to help you be more valued and appreciated. Yes. Because you are proactive on these things. And then the other things that you can do for you by setting boundaries and making sure you have a life outside of work, it's only going to make you a better professional, a better employee. You're going to be more focused and more productive. And in the end, everyone wins. you and your employer.
Yes. Focused, productive, and happier. You will be a happier professional and who will get along better with your coworkers versus snapping at them because you are deprived of just being out in nature and interacting with other people.
And so to close, because we talked a lot about Slack, there's something they use with their employees that it stuck with me, and I actually tell my employees the same thing. It's called work hard, but go home.
Yes.
And it really strikes home because some of us just, I love work. I love my job and love work, but I still want to go home and have a life outside of work.
Yes. Work hard, but go home. I don't know who you are watching this, but please write that down. Take that to heart. I am taking it to heart. Work hard, but go home. Excellent. Well, Madalina, thank you so much for putting aside time and just spending some time sharing your expertise, sharing your tips, sharing your knowledge about doing remote work well. I appreciate you, and I know that our viewers do as well.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation. It refreshed a lot of things in my mind as well. So I think I benefited from it as well. So thank you, Deborah.
Nice. Well, just because I want to put a plug in there for Madalina, if you are looking for an award-winning marketing agency, or you know of a small business that could benefit from her expertise in creating plans, strategic marketing to grow their business, feel free to reach out to Bright Pink Agency. The information will be in the description segment so that you can contact her. And with regard to your personal and professional growth, if you're feeling really stuck in general, you're looking for a change, you're trying to pivot, but you're not really sure where or how, I want to invite you to register for a personal growth course that I teach called Reset 2021. It's based on a book by John Maxwell called 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth. So I invite you to click on the link below to get information about the class and to register. Early registration ends May 15th. So keep that in mind, and the next class begins on June 5th. If you enjoyed today's talk with myself and with Madalina, I invite you to give it a thumbs up. If you've not subscribed already, please consider doing that and hit that bell and the all so you can get notifications of new helpful talks like this, and share it with somebody. I know that you know someone who needs to get some solid tips about working remotely. Thank you so much for watching and for being a part of this talk. Leave your tips in the description below so others can benefit. And with that said, have a wonderful work week.